item inside Performance Point is a KPI, a key performance indicator, very much based on the generic business intelligence concept of a key performance indicator, where you've got an actual value, where you've measured something that's been achieved, you've got a target value, and the target is saying what did we want to achieve. And that's a very basic, normal KPI definition. Performance Point, in addition to that, gives you the ability to actually have multiple actuals and multiple targets on one KPI, which is a little bit more flexible than that standard definition. So all of your KPIs have got indicators, red, green, yellow. That's the most common set of indicators. Are we doing okay? Are we doing great? Or are we doing badly? And what we're doing with the strategy maps is we're taking those colors, and instead of just showing an indicator next to a piece of data, you're going to go onto a strategy map and you're going to highlight a particular shape to show that color. So there's really three places that we would use strategy maps. So the first one is the traditional balanced scorecard. Norton and Kaplan came up with a methodology for managing companies. They called it the balanced scorecard. You've got different perspectives that you need to look at. If you look at this diagram, the four perspectives being named financial, customer, internal, and learning and growth. There's lots of companies that have given these slightly different names, and perhaps customer perspective has been called sales, or learning and growth has been called HR, and I've seen these named a bit differently. But the key point to the balanced scorecard as a strategy map is saying, how do we visualize how these actual data points relate to each other? So we've got learning and growth. How does learning and growth actually affect our metrics inside the company? So this isn't something that you would just throw together quickly. This is really the culmination of quite a long process where you're mapping out what are the things that we need to measure our company performance on, what is actually making a difference to how I run my company. Using the same technology, there's a couple of other things we can do. So we're going to touch a little bit on doing this today, and that's really mapping out a process and monitoring that process. So here's a process map that I built up, and it's a motor vehicle production line. And we're saying, right, so on this production line, we need to have all the components delivered, the components of the wheels, the body, the engine. These components need to be delivered to our production line. We also need to have our staff arrive on site. And then we start assembling the cars. We've got assembly. And this is really a simplification of the whole process, but it gives you an idea that you've got this whole workflow. And what we want to do is we want to be able to look at the workflow and say, are all the steps in the workflow actually working as well as they should? And this gives you a very quick way of saying, okay, I look at this and I know that I've got a problem in my components delivery. Maybe the supplier isn't delivering stuff on time, and we're compensating for it elsewhere, so we haven't fallen behind. But really, that could have a knock-on effect later. Because you've got the flowchart in front of you, you can instantly see where that knock-on effect is going to hit you. Now, that's very useful. One of the other places that you can use these strategy maps for is custom visualizations. So what we've got here, this is a little drawing that we're building at the moment. You can go and create custom types of shapes. This is a building that grows and shrinks based on a number. So the number of stories actually illustrates one number, and the color of the windows illustrates a different number. We're not going to do this particular visualization today. We're instead going to say, instead of drawing out our process, let's actually draw a map of our assembly line. And on that map, let's do a highlighting and say, this area is doing well, this area isn't doing well, so that you can get that instantaneous quick view. So I think that's enough theory. Let's jump on over, and I'm going to go to my SharePoint site, and what I've got is I've got a couple libraries here with my Performance Point content in them, and I'm going to go ahead. I've actually opened up Performance Point already, and I'm going to start creating a basic scorecard. So the first thing is, when you're in Performance Point, you need to connect to your data source. And your data source could be a cube, it could be a SharePoint list, it could be a SQL table. We're going to show you both. We're first going to connect our data source to a cube. And I'm going to do that by right-clicking and saying New Data Source. I want to connect to analysis services. Hit OK. And I'm going to use a standard connection. I'm just going to type in my server name. In my case, it's localhost. And I'm going to choose my cube. We're going to go ahead and use the AdventureWorks cube. And I'm going to choose AdventureWorks. So when you're setting up your data source, there's a couple things you need to be aware of. And this is all the basic settings. Just to get connected, one thing you have to do is you have to map your time dimension. So now I'm telling it performance point, how does it understand what to do with different date functionality? So I'm going to say map this to date.date.calendar. That's my time hierarchy. I'm going to choose a date to begin the year. Right, now this is AdventureWorks, so we don't have any 2010 data, so I'm going to map it to the 1st of January 2008. Going to hit OK. I need to tell it what level this is at, so in this case it drills down to a day level. I'll hit day. And over here I'm saying, this member in the cube, January 1st, 2008, what date does it map to in a real date? So I'm going to tell it 1st of Jan 2011. So now whenever I use today's date, performance point's going to think it's the 1st of January 2008. I then need to set up the time aggregations. This is pretty simple. Date is day, month is month, calendar quarter is quarter, semester is semester, and year is year. Right, almost done. Let's give our data source a name. I'm going to call it DSADW. And I'm going to save it away. Okay, so first thing is we're connected to the cube and we know what the date dimension is. So we're now going to create some content. And I'm going to create a KPI first. So I'm going to right click performance point content. I'm going to go new. I'm going to say new KPI. Okay, so I'm going to do a blank KPI. Alright, and as you can see, I'm just going to give this KPI name. I'm going to call it sales. As you can see, it's created a KPI for us. It's got an actual, which is the actual value achieved. It's got a target. And if we look at this, you've got various columns. So the actual over there doesn't have a compare to because it's the actual. You can set the number format. We're going to leave it for now. It doesn't have indicators because it's an actual. Final thing is the data mapping. So this is saying where do I get my data from? By default, it's just set to 1. So if you're prototyping, you haven't built your cube yet, you can set up your KPIs and just put in some dummy data and build your cube with that dummy data. Now, I do have a data source, so I'm going to click Change Source. I'm going to choose the DSADW that I created earlier. I'm going to double click. Okay, so now this screen over here is saying, in the cube, what fields should I use? Now, I have a sales amount. I'm going to choose sales amount. And I'm actually not going to put any filters on it. I'm going to hit OK. Target, very similar. What am I comparing it to? Number format. What indicators must I use? This is a standard set of indicators. Red, yellow, green. We also need to do the data mappings. So once again, change the source, DSADW, and I'm going to say sales amount quota. Right, pretty easy. Now I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to add another actual. So instead of just having one base actual, I'm going to have an extra one. And what we're going to do is we're going to say we want an actual that is the sales for this year. So I'm going to say sales for this year. And my fixed values, it's also going to be sales amount. I'm going to go DSADW. And I'm going to choose sales amount again. This time I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to filter this so that this column automatically picks up the current year. Right, let's hit time intelligence filter. And we've got this nifty formula editor, which will actually convert a statement like that into some MDX for us, so we don't have to write that MDX. So I'm going to hit OK. Now, I know what my sales are for this year in this case being 2008. What I want to do is I want to say, how have my sales done compared to last year? So I'm going to say new target and go sales LY for last year. We want to change what we're comparing it to. We want to compare it to this year. And we're going to hit data mappings, change source, DSADW. This time for the target, instead of choosing sales amount quota, I want to say what was my sales amount for last year. So if I hit new time intelligence filter, I can expand that formula a bit and I can say year minus 1. It'll give me the value for 2007. Okay, final thing I want to do is I want to change these thresholds here. So I know that if I did better than last year, that's green. If I did the same as last year, I want it to be yellow. So I'm going to say that make that 99%. And if I did less than 99% of last year, that's red, it's bad. Sales KPIs. Cool. So I'm going to create a scorecard. And we're going to go new. We're going to say scorecard. And I'm going to choose a blank scorecard to add the KPI that I just created. So hit blank scorecard. Okay, so I'm going to call this sales year on year for my scorecard name. I'm going to save that away. And then I'm going to go over to the details tab on the right hand side. And over here I've got a list of the KPIs, and I can expand out to my list, pull out sales and drop it over there. So here we've got the sales KPI. I'm going to hit edit and hit update so we can view the numbers. So the first thing you'll notice is that your actual and your target are much bigger values than your last year and this year because they're not filtered by date. So typically you wouldn't include one column that's filtered by date and one that's not filtered by date in the same scorecard. You'd maybe have another place where you'd choose the date from a drop-down rather than have it in the column. So we obviously don't want all of this on the single scorecard. So I'm going to remove those columns, and I'm going to say I want sales this year versus sales last year. What I want to do next is I actually want to enable some drill down on this. So I'm going to go to the right hand side, and that's interesting. So normally when it doesn't show a data source, you can pick it from the drop down at the bottom. Let me just there we go. So as soon as I saved it, it put the data source in the drop down at the bottom. That then gives me a drill down over here for dimensions, and I want to have a drill down for my product dimension. Let's expand product. Let's drag categories. Now, for those of you who are not that familiar with this environment, these icons are quite important. This icon over here, that's saying this is a multi-level hierarchy, and this icon with the 6 blocks instead of the triangle is saying it's a single-level hierarchy. So I'm going to drag in the single-level hierarchy and show you that to you first, and then we're going to remove it. I'm going to put the multi-level in. So I'm going to drag it over here, and this is also quite important. You want to always drag your first drill down so that this little blue line appears to the right of sales. And it'll show you up a text box over there telling you what it's going to drill down. Last child is saying, give me the drill down as a child of this. If you were sibling, it'd put it on the same level, but we want to drill down from sales, so we'll do last child. Okay. Alright, so what you'll notice here is it's only got a single level. So if we hit all of those, we'd get a single level and we'd have a drill down to accessories, bikes, clothing and components. The difference between that and the multi-level, so I bring the multi-level in, again, notice the last child. So this looks pretty similar. Difference here is this. We now have this multi-level drill down. Now I don't have to manually go and select everything that I want to appear. I can do auto select, and I could say select the children and only bring the children and accessories, or I could also select accessories. I also have another one that says select children, and that would automatically tick them. It's quite an important point because these two things do quite different things. When I've done select children of bikes, it selected mountain bikes, road bikes, and touring bikes. Now, if we went and we decided we're actually going to start stocking some new bike types, we're going to start stocking downhill bikes, it wouldn't appear automatically over here because we've only selected mountain bikes, road bikes, and touring bikes. If I say auto select, that new member would actually appear there. So I'm going to just finish up and put those in. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm just going to shrink these up because I actually don't want them to show on my SharePoint page. So great, what we've got is we've got our drill down. You'll notice though that as soon as we put the drill down in, the number at the top level of sales disappeared. So we're going to go and we're going to tell Performance Point that it needs to roll those numbers up. We'll do that by changing the calculation on the KPI. We want to do sum of children. So sum of children is just telling it to sum it up. Save. And update. Cool. One point here, quite important, is when it's hitting the cube directly, it formats it according to what's in the cube. As soon as it rolls it up, it loses that formatting. So all you need to do is just hit this format button, say currency. Now I'm going to do one other thing. I actually want to show these values in thousands rather than show them as whole numbers. I'm going to go 0.001 multiplied by 0.001 to make it thousands. Save it away. And now we're showing it in thousands. Great. That's pretty simple. Let's put that together and show it to you on a dashboard. Now this is a scorecard. We're now going to build a dashboard. So I'm going to go new dashboard, header in 2 columns works, and I'm going to give my dashboard a name. It's going to be sales year over year. I'm going to say dashboard, and I'm going to drag my scorecard in. I'm going to save. I'm going to deploy it to SharePoint. I have a dashboards folder. Cool, pretty basic. What you'll notice as well is it automatically has selected everything under accessories, but we can still drill down further. It just goes back and it requeries. So, nothing too hideously complicated over there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to build a very basic performance point strategy map on top of this. So, I'm going to choose the cross-functional flowchart. Right, and I'm going to call this the AdventureWorks balance scorecard. We are, of course, only doing one of the measures inside the balance scorecard. This might be overall, and we might have some rolled up goals there, and this is a sales one. And I'm going to say what makes up my sales numbers is product sales, which is accessories, clothing, components, and bikes. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on building a fancy Visio diagram. I'm just going to save this away. Document library is fine. Balanced scorecard. Okay, let's top back to Performance Point. We're now going to add that strategy map to Performance Point. So what I want to do is I actually want to create a Performance Point report. And we've got this strategy map report type. Let's hit OK. Now, one key thing here is the strategy map has to be associated with the scorecard because it actually picks up those colors from the indicators on the scorecard. You can't assign it to a KPI directly. It has to be a scorecard. So hit finish. Let's just call it a stripe map AEW. And what we're going to do is I'm going to say edit strategy map. And over here we've got a couple options. We've got this import Visio file. So let's hit import Visio file. I saved this in my documents folder. AdventureWorks that balance scorecard. Cool. And over here we can say connect shape. And what it will do when we connect it to the shape is it'll actually pick up that color. So one little tick box you've got over there says show KPI name. I'll show you what that does, but we're going to change it in a minute. Sorry, I need to click connect. Right, and as you can see, if we don't tick it, it doesn't put a name. If we tick it up, it puts a name, but it puts sales. We of course can edit that, and we can say accessories. All right, untick that, and we can connect that up over there. Connect. Key point. If I clicked on that and I clicked on the actual, it isn't going to pick up the color because there's no color over there. So it's actually based on the column. So that's components. That's clothing. That's bikes. I'm going to say clothes, bikes. Clothing. And okay, hit apply. So they're all showing up red. Maybe we want to change our threshold a little bit to show you what the color difference will be. So let's say, let's make it 80%. Or even 70%. Save that away. Update. No. Accessories. Let's just edit that and make sure we connected to the right one. Okay, I think I might have connected it to the wrong one. But that's cool. So as you can see, those colors will change. Now, that's an additional way of visualizing your data. Let's put that on the dashboard and see how it looks. Okay, save and deploy. And you've got a couple of options for what you do from here. So the one thing is all the data that you've got stored inside your Visio diagram is actually available to you over here. So this is all stuff that you could edit inside Visio and make available to the user. So process number and that sort of thing. So let's jump out of that. Final thing we're going to do with this particular scorecard is we're just going to create a filter on top of it so that we can change the values that appear. So I'm going to say new filter. I'm going to choose member selection, which will let us filter by dimension. I'm going to choose my AdventureWorks data source. I'm going to choose my dimension. Let's filter by sales territory. Yeah. Select my members. Now, here we've got the same options where you can drill down, and you could only select a couple of them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say auto select, select all descendants, click OK. We don't have a default. Let's just set a default. So we can say set as default selection. Say next. We want a multi-select tree so we can select multiple countries. Finish. and I'm going to call this sales territory. Cool. And I'm going to save it. Final thing is add this filter to our dashboard. Drop it in. Now, we've added the filter, but if we deployed this, it wouldn't actually be functional because it hasn't been connected up to anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect it. And I'm going to show you two different ways of doing that. The first, we grab that member unique name and we drag it onto the scorecard. And it brings up this box. It says, what do we want to connect it to? Page is saying filter the value in the background. Don't change which rows are displayed. Don't change what columns are displayed. Filter in the background. Member unique name is, of course, the key in the cube. Hit OK. Right, so now if I click on the other one, we've now connected it to the scorecard but not to the strategy map. We can also go there by saying create connection. So here when we do this we have to specify where's this connection coming from. We want it from the header where the filter is. What's it connecting to? Page is great. We want member unique name. Save it away. Okay, and as we change these values, you'll notice that the scorecard is updated, and in parallel the strategy map on the right hand side is updated. Now you don't have to have both the scorecard and the strategy map on the same page. You could have just the strategy map or just the scorecard. In fact, just the strategy map is really how you would do this quite a lot. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at doing this for mapping out a process. Now I've pre-built some of these libraries and we're going to use those pre-built libraries, but I want to show you the process you could go to quickly get some data in to do a visualization like this. So let's assume you don't have a cube and you want to get some data in to highlight a particular process, and you don't want to go through a whole IT dev step. What you can do is in SharePoint you go Site Actions, More Options, and we're going to create a custom list in SharePoint to store our data. I'm going to say List, Custom List, and I'm going to call it Process Flow. Okay, here we've got a basic list. We can hit this list settings on the right hand side. Alright, this thing over here. That's going to let us create a couple of extra columns. So maybe the columns here, we've got our title. Maybe the columns for this process are what is the actual step. So the step in the process, we can make it a choice. And the choice could be deliver components, fit wheels on body, install engine, because this is if we're looking at a production line on a car or something like that. Deliver components, not delivery components. Okay, so that'll give us our dimension that we can use. I'm going to hit create column again, and you can do a couple of steps of this, but you generally always want to have a date that's applicable. So we hit date and time. And perhaps the other thing that you want to do is number of cars through station. Right, and this is saying what's the number that we're measuring. And I'm going to say it's a number and no decimal places. Very simple. If we jump back to our list, here we've got a list. We can edit it in datasheet view, which is great. We can put first test. Step is deliver components, 2011 101, and number of cars is 5. Now, what I've done is I've pre-built a couple of these lists, and the first one here is very similar to what we're talking about. As we've said, what are the different steps? So the step is components delivered. I've also got some sub-steps. So which components have been delivered? Has the body been delivered? Has the wheels been delivered? How many cars have come through? And an additional metric maybe is average duration minutes. Right, we've got the date, and the final dimension that we're going to slice by is production line. So this is where the process is happening. We've put our data inside SharePoint. Maybe it's getting pumped in automatically from a SQL job. Maybe it's sitting in a SQL table rather than a SharePoint list, wherever it's coming from. The other thing you can do is you can create some targets. So here I've got another list, very similar, but now I don't have a date. I'm saying on any given day. Doesn't matter what day it is. Any given day, I want to push 54 cars through the delivery on the bodies. Put your targets in here. You've got your numbers and you've got the same dimensions. So if we jump back to performance point, we now want to create a data connection to those SharePoint tables. So I go data connections and I hit new data source. This time we're going to say SharePoint list. So you need to enter the SharePoint site URL. I'm going to jump back here. Now if you have a look at the URL, how you know what the SharePoint site URL is firstly you take off anything that ends in .aspx, because that's the page name. Before that will be the name of the list. That's process targets, and that's saying we want to look at lists. So everything outside of that, that's your site name. Let's jump back to dashboard design. I'm going to paste the site name. The SharePoint site list is always in a BI site, the all lists, and then you can choose which list it is. Now I've got process steps first. Okay, now just like with mapping the AdventureWorks, we need to map the time dimension. Picks up which one it is automatically, so we just tick it off. We say, what do we actually want in our time period levels, and I want year, month, and day. Final thing is we've got a preview here, and the preview lets you see what performance points is picked up as dimensions. So it says steps of dimension, sub-steps of dimension, number of cars as a fact. How it does this is it says, is it a number or is it a text value? If you've got something, say you had a year field, and your year was 2010, it would pick up as a fact, and you'd need to change it to a dimension. Also, pretty easy. So I'm going to rename that. I'm going to call it DS process steps. Save it away. So that gets me my actuals. I need some targets that I'm going to compare to the actuals. So it's also a SharePoint list. And I'm going to paste my URL again. All lists again. Difference here is we're going to hit process targets. So the time dimension is a bit different. There isn't one of type time, so we'll skip that. Jump to the view, and as you can see, it's picked up the dimensions correctly and also the facts. So let's rename DS process targets. Save that away. Let's create a new KPI. Alright, so blank KPI is great. And let's just call it process. I've got an action and I've got a target. We're going to change the data mappings. Click change source. And over here we now have a couple additional data connections. Now we know for our actual, process steps is our actual. And let's look at number of cars first. And for the target, we're going to go data mappings, change source, process targets, and we're going to choose number of cars. So now these two numbers are coming from different places. Pretty easy. I'm going to leave everything else as the default. And I'm going to create a new scorecard. Right. Once again, I'm going to go with the blank scorecard. And I'm going to call the scorecard assembly process. Save it. Let's bring in our KPI onto our sheet. We hit update. Cool, we've got an actual, we've got a target, and let's bring in our dimensions. Now what you'll notice is you've got a data source at the bottom which isn't appearing, so let's jump out, jump back in, and it's picked up the data source automatically. It's picked up process targets. Let's drill in and say process steps. What you'll notice is that these dimensions actually change. Now, because the dimensions that I've got in those two lists are named the same and the values in them are the same, it'll be able to cross-reference them. So I'm going to pull step, and I'm going to say select visible. Okay. Now, a little tip over here is I spoke to you earlier about stuff that automatically updates when the list changes. This dimension doesn't automatically update. If you add a new member, it won't appear, but you do have the control over which ones you want to choose. If you want it to automatically update, you would choose this entry under named sets. It's a little known trick. That's not the case with Cube scorecards. It's only the case with SharePoint and SQL scorecards. So I'm going to drag substep in, and again I'm going to do this last child. As you can see, it's made it a last child of all of them. If I hit update, what you can see is it's pulled in all of those sub-steps, and of course sales doesn't fall under assembly. So what we do in order to fix that is we just go view settings, we say filters, and we filter the empty rows. Highlight them as red in the design so you can still see that they're there, but it'll not show when we deploy. Okay, so I'm going to shrink those. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple filters. So member selection again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my process steps as the data source. Filter dimension. So one is which production line is it? Is it production line 1, production line 2? Say select members. Here we've got production lines 1, 2, and 4. I'm going to make 1 the default. Next. And list is fine. Production line. Let's do our next filter. So the next filter is going to be the date. I'm going to say member selection. Process steps again. Select dimension. I'm just going to select date.day. Filter members, and we've only got 3 entries inside that list. Right, and I'm going to make that the default. Next, list is great. Date. Save. 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 Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new scorecard, or sorry, a new dashboard. I'm going to call this dashboard process steps. So very similar to what we've done so far. I'm going to pull assembly process into the left-hand column. I'm going to go to my filters. I'm going to pull date, and I'm going to pull production line, and then I'm going to connect them up. Scroll over and grab member unique name. Picks up all those settings automatically. Do the same for production line. And let's save and deploy and go have a look at this. Alright, so I'm going to deploy to dashboards, that's fine. Cool. And as you can see, now what we've got is dynamic scorecard, the values will change. So the next step really is connecting up that strategy map, similar to what we've done. So I'm going to go new, report, and strategy map. We need to choose our scorecard, and it's the assembly process scorecard. Okay, so edit the strategy map, import a Visio file, and I think the one that I pre-created is under webinars. There we go. motor vehicle production. Okay, so one little tip that you might need is when it imports, it defaults to the last sheet you had open. So because I've got multiple sheets, it's defaulted to the wrong one. So I'm just going to save that with the other sheet open. I'm going to say edit strategy map, import Visio file, motor vehicle production, and it's picked up the correct sheet. So now what I want to do is I want to connect some of these shapes up. And I'm going to click components delivered, connect. So I'm not actually going to connect all of them up, just enough to show you what it looks like. Painting. And I guess the last one there is really sales. Connect. Close it up. So that's really all we wanted to do on that. I'm going to say resize to fit. And what that'll do is just trim anything that's sitting around as white space on that. Hit apply. And let's save it away. Let's add it to our dashboard. Connect up the filters. Yep. Save. Deploy. Okay, and as you can see, we've now got the Visio map over there. It'll update, and as we change these things, the colors will update. Pretty simple, really. The last thing we're going to do is, instead of just using standard cross-functional flowchart shapes, we're actually going to build a couple of our own shapes inside Visio and get them to update. So let's jump across into Visio. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new sheet. I'm going to rename the sheet. And what we can do is there's a developer tab that's not necessarily always enabled. And what you want to do is say customize the ribbon and just tick developer over there. Alright, by default it's unticked. If you tick developer, you get a whole bunch of new functionality that's very useful. So when we're in the developer tab, we can actually draw some of our own components. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a couple that I edited now. So what I did is I created my own stencil, and I'm going to say new master. So now I'm creating my own Visio shape. Pretty easy, and I'm going to call the Visio shape loading bay. Okay, right click, edit the master, have our developer tab. We can start doing some drawing. So I know that my loading bay has got a couple of truck bays. Yeah, make it. Alright, so it's got 3 truck bays, and there's also a loading area that stretches across there. And maybe there's some other pieces that we want to draw where it doesn't come out like that, and it pulls across. So you're drawing like a building schematic almost. Now, one of the things that's a little bit different is you'll notice that if we zoom in here, you can actually see those lane lines. This is a hollow shape. It's not solid, so when we update the fill, that won't actually change color. There's ways to get around that. So I want to make this one shape. We've got these operations over here. Right. So you'd think union, put them together. You actually need to fragment them first. The fragment will then give you that zoom in that you've got a full. Okay, highlight all of them, say union. Now this is now really one shape. So let's just close that. It'll update. It'll appear, and I can now drag in my loading bay. So cool, there's a loading bay. Now some of the other things you can do is you can actually add pictures. So I did a couple little things quickly here. Just move that out the way. Where what we did is I simply inserted a picture just to highlight that. So put your picture in, resize. Now I haven't gone and made something particularly fancy. If you want to do this stuff, you'll probably get a graphic designer who does it. So I'm not going to update that. Okay, so let's say we've got our delivery bays. We have a couple of production lines. Yeah. And actually, we have 3 different production lines. Right, we can save that away. And if we jump into Visio, let's add that as a report. Go new, report, and we want strategy map. We're going to use the assembly process scorecard. We're actually going to jump in and we're going to change that assembly process scorecard a little bit to support our new diagram. And this is assembly line. Edit, import. Let's import it. And cool. So what we've got here, we've got our loading docs, we've got our production lines, and hit apply. I'm not going to connect anything up until I've changed the scorecard. Okay, so change that. Now the reason I'm changing it is because we don't have the different lines in here. So I'm going to delete that drill down, and I'm going to say, give me the production lines. Right, now I'm going to leave them zoomed out like that. Save it away. We jump back to must have called it something else. It wasn't one of those. Let's just change what oh, there we go. It was just the preview not showing up correctly. Cool. So now what I want to do is I want to connect it to the shapes, and I know that that's components delivered, so I'm going to connect it at that level. I know that this is assembly for, okay, so all of these are actually assembly for line 1. We could also have a further drill down to the sub-steps. All of these are line 2. All of these are line 4. Except that the colors for those aren't updating. I've obviously connected it up slightly wrong, but let's not spend too much time on that. Okay, so save that away. Yeah, I'm just going to rename that quickly. Alright, so it's picked up the preview incorrectly because it's still picking up the old one. And let's jump down to our dashboard process steps. I'm going to remove assembly lines. Assembly line itemized. Now what I'm not going to do is connect up the production line. I'm just going to connect up the date. Let's save. Deploy to SharePoint. And as you can see, it's showing up there. And those lines aren't showing up, but that would normally work quite seamlessly. Okay, Rachel, I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, great.
Do we have any questions that are coming up?
We do have. We have a couple questions. Eddie would like to know what version of Visio is required for SharePoint 2010. And a follow-up to that is, does it need to be a 64-bit?
Okay, so there's two questions there. The first one is SharePoint 2010, and SharePoint 2010 is required to be 64-bit. For the performance point stuff, you only need Visio 2007. You don't need Visio 2010, and that's great. If you wanted to use Visio Services, our next week's talk, that requires Visio 2010. But for this stuff, it's all Visio 2007 stuff. The question says, is this available in Visio 2003? And that's actually it's not available in the 2003 version of Visio. Although having said that, if you create your Visio documents in Visio 2003, it's very easy to import them into the 2007. You'll just need one version of Visio 2007 on the performance point server.
Great. Miguel was asking, is there any best practice for installing Performance Point?
There's actually a very good white paper from Microsoft talking about installing SharePoint 2010, and they've got a great section on performance points and configuring security. So look for the installing SharePoint 2010 security white paper. I don't have a link with me, but there is a great white paper.
Okay, great. Nighton would like to know, can you explain a little bit about code management and PPS about various components once built?
Like code management. Okay, so I guess you're really talking about managing the stuff that you've built inside PPS, and often you might encounter problems where you start building a lot of dashboards and you got KPIs and you end up with 100, you end up with 200 and 400 components inside a SharePoint library. What we do is, by default, I don't use the performance point content library that's created by default. I actually go ahead and delete that, and I create new libraries for each one of the different collections of items. So maybe that item is 2 dashboards, maybe it's 3 dashboards. The dashboard, all of its KPIs, and possibly filters that are associated with go in that library. Because what you can do is your components don't all have to come from one library. You can have your filters sit in one SharePoint library, your KPIs in another, your scorecard in the third one, and splitting it out into libraries like that lets you get to the point where it becomes much more manageable, and you've only got 30, 40 items in your library. And I recommend as soon as you're getting to 30, 40 items in a performance point library, that's when you need to start thinking about creating a new library.
Okay, great. We have another question. Do you have any information, or can you talk briefly about licensing?
Okay, so very briefly about licensing. Performance Point is a SharePoint Enterprise license, so you have to have the Enterprise edition of SharePoint. For the rest of the licensing questions, that's not really something that we go into in depth.
Okay, great. Well, that's all of the questions, and that was a wonderful presentation, and thank you so much, Mark. So,
Cool, thank you, Rachel.
yeah, thank you. And everyone, be sure to join us every Tuesday and Thursday for more free training sessions. Have a great day.